and it's something that's really hard to quantify. When it comes to the bees that we were looking at in our recent study, which are wild bumblebees, these bees are critical pollinators for a lot of natural landscapes that we'll camp in or hike or walk around in, but also for a lot of crops that put a lot of color onto our plates. Things like tomatoes, squash, berries. These are foods that need to be pollinated by bumblebees. And if they're not, then they won't be pollinated or not nearly as well.
You talked there about wild bees. There's been some researchers suggesting that managed bees or domesticated bees might actually be causing damage to wild bees. Can you explain, and what are your thoughts about that suggestion?
So one of the things that we're starting to see more recently is that when people bring in these colonies, managed colonies of honeybees, which are, and essentially domestic animals similar to chickens or cows, they're really important for pollinating some of the large agricultural crops that we rely on. But these colonies of honeybees also tend to forage, and they tend to compete with these wild bees. And so when you have wild bumblebees that are now under threat from climate change, from habitat loss, from pesticides, and you add in this additional layer of now they have to compete with honeybees, this puts a lot of additional strain on them.
So this study's been issued. You're one of the co-authors trying to raise global attention to it. There are a lot of pressing issues vying for that attention. How should the bee decline factor into all of that? What is the urgency behind it?
Well, I think one of the things we found in this study is that one of the big causes of this bee decline is climate change. And climate change isn't just affecting bees, it's affecting a lot of other wildlife and animals around the globe, and it's affecting humans in a lot of different ways as well. So I think, if we can start to take strong action on climate change, we'll not only be helping the bees, but we'll be helping a lot of other problems that we're starting to see as well.
What about the beekeepers we heard there in that report? How do they factor into the decline, or perhaps into efforts to reverse the trend?
I think it's, it's a difficult thing to say. I love honey, so, I'm a huge fan of beekeepers that do that as well. And bees, honeybees are really important for a lot of different reasons, economical, cultural reasons. But there's kind of no way around it. They do tend to put an additional layer of strain on wild bumblebee populations. So I think as long as we're trying to balance the use of managed bees with protecting natural habitat, native pollinator plants, and other strategies, then we can see a very peaceful coexistence here.
What sort of global cooperation have you seen on this effort, or is there really a global disconnect in terms of managing the situation?
I think it depends from region to region, from country to country. But in general, I think there's a lot of optimism. There are a lot of really great groups that are trying to promote awareness on this issue, both on terms of kind of the importance of wild and native pollinators like bumblebees, and also kind of the different threats that they're facing, including habitat loss and pesticides and managed bee populations. So I think there are a lot of really great people, a lot of really great groups that are doing research and promoting this in schools and in communities. So there's a lot of optimism, I think.
Is there any tangible difference that the average person might see already today because of the bee decline in their day-to-day life?
So one of the things we found in this paper was when we looked at the likelihood of finding a bee, so just the odds of going into a meadow, looking around and seeing what type of species you would find of bumblebee, you were about a third less likely to see any given species across all of North America and Europe now than you would be 30 or 40 years ago. So in a really incredibly short time period, we're seeing an incredible loss of kind of a really critical piece of these beautiful meadows and fields that used to be very common.
All right.